For 30 years, I carried one emotion in my heart, a heavy, burning thing that shaped every decision I ever made. Revenge. Not the hot, impulsive kind you see in movies, but the cold, calculated type that grows stronger with time. Like ice forming layer by layer until it's thick enough to walk on. My name is Sarah Mitchell, though that wasn't always my name. I'm a best-selling author now, living in a Manhattan penthouse, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. My books have been translated into 40 languages. I've been on morning talk shows, featured in major magazines, and invited to speak at universities across the country. From the outside, my life looks perfect, but success, I learned, doesn't fill the emptiness inside. It just gives you better furniture to sit on while you feel it. I can't speak. I was born with a congenital vocal cord disorder that left me voiceless. When I was 5 years old, I was adopted by Robert and Carol Henderson, a wealthy couple from Connecticut. They told everyone they adopted me out of the goodness of their hearts, a charitable act to give a disabled child a chance at life. What they didn't tell anyone was that I was just a prop in their perfect family. Portraits something to polish their image at country club dinners and charity galas. Your real mother didn't want you, Carol would say, her words as sharp as the click of her high heels on marble floors. She abandoned you because you couldn't talk. You were defective. We took pity on you. Those words burrowed deep into my young heart and made a home there, festering for decades. I grew up in a beautiful prison. The Hendersons' estate had manicured gardens, an Olympic-sized pool, and rooms I wasn't allowed to enter when guests visited. "Stay upstairs," Robert would command. "We don't want people asking uncomfortable questions." So I'd watch from my window as they laughed with their friends below. A ghost in my own home. School was worse. Kids are cruel to anyone who's different, and I was very different. They called me the mute freak and made exaggerated hand gestures to mock me. I carried a notepad everywhere to communicate, but teachers found it inconvenient. The Hendersons refused to hire a sign language interpreter. "You need to learn to adapt to the real world," Robert said. "We're not going to coddle you." So I adapted. I learned to read people's faces, to anticipate their needs before they spoke them. I discovered that words on paper could be more powerful than words spoken aloud. And I found refuge in the local library, where books didn't care if you could talk or not. That's where I discovered my gift. I could write. Not just write, I could create worlds that pulled people in and made them feel things they'd forgotten they could feel. By 18, I'd published my first short story in a literary magazine. By 25, my debut novel won the National Book Award. By 30, I was wealthy enough to never need anyone's help again. But wealth and success didn't ease the ache inside. If anything, they made it worse. Because now I had everything, and it still felt like nothing. Every award, every bestseller, every standing ovation, they were all just steps on a ladder leading to one destination, finding the woman who gave birth to me and then threw me away like garbage. I hired private investigators. Good ones. Expensive ones. They searched records, followed leads, interviewed people at adoption agencies. But it was like searching for a ghost. The trail went cold at a closed adoption agency in California, with records that had been lost in a fire decades ago. Dead end after dead end. Until 6 months ago, I was in my apartment on a rainy Thursday evening. The kind of night that makes you feel like the only person awake in the city. My assistant, Michael, had left for the day. I'd made tea and settled onto my sofa, with my tablet, half watching a documentary about memory loss that I'd found while scrolling through streaming channels. I wasn't really paying attention. It was just background noise until one particular segment began. The camera focused on a woman in her mid-60s, wearing a simple cardigan and a tired smile. She had gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, and hands that looked like they'd worked hard for many years. "I lost my memory 30 years ago," she said to the interviewer. "A car accident erased everything from before. I don't know who I was, what I did, or if I had family, but I feel this constant ache, like I'm missing something precious. Someone precious." Her name was June Morrison. She worked as a janitor at a public library in upstate New York and volunteered at a center for deaf children. The documentary explained that despite earning barely above minimum wage, she donated monthly to organizations that helped find missing children. "I don't know why I do it," June said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It just feels necessary, like I'm searching for something I can't remember losing." Then the camera showed her volunteering at the Children's Center. She was reading a story to deaf children using sign language, but it wasn't standard sign language. Her gestures had something unique about them, personal modifications, special ways of expressing certain words. And that's when I saw it. My heart stopped. She signed the word love in a way I'd never seen anyone else do. It wasn't the standard sign. It was a special gesture, hands forming a specific shape that wasn't in any textbook. And it was exactly the way I signed love. A way I'd done since I was a child, without knowing why. A way that felt right in my bones, even though it wasn't correct. I rewound the video, watched it again, and again. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my tablet. I grabbed my phone and typed a message to Michael: "Book me on the earliest flight to Albany. Tonight, if possible. And find out everything you can about June Morrison, where she lives, where she works. Every detail." Within 2 hours, I was in a car headed to the airport. Within 6 hours, I was checking into a hotel in Albany. And within 24 hours, I was standing outside the Children's Center, where June Morrison volunteered, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. I'd waited 30 years for this moment. 30 years of anger, of planning, of imagining the look on her face when she realized that the daughter she'd abandoned had become more successful than she could ever dream of being. I was going to make her regret every day of those 30 years. But as I stood there in the cold morning air, watching through the window as June helped a small deaf girl learn to sign her name, something unexpected happened. The girl was crying, frustrated, probably, by how hard it was to make her fingers do what she wanted. And June knelt down, took the girl's small hands in her weathered ones, and guided them through the motions with such patience, such tenderness, that even from outside I could feel it. That wasn't how I'd imagined her. The woman in my imagination was cold, selfish, someone who could abandon a child without a backward glance. But the woman I was watching, she was something else entirely. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The center's director greeted me. Warmly, Michael had arranged a generous donation in exchange for a meeting with June. "She'll be honored to meet you," the director gushed. "June is a huge fan of your books." When June came into the small office, she looked nervous and excited. "I can't believe Emma Mitchell is here," she said, using my pen name. "I've read all your books. Your story about the girl who couldn't speak, but found her voice through art, it changed my life." I studied her face, looking for any sign of recognition. But there was nothing, just genuine admiration from a devoted reader. I signed to her using standard sign language. "Thank you. I'm honored." She responded in sign, and again. I noticed those unique gestures mixed in with the standard ones. My breath caught. "Where did you learn to sign?" I asked, my hands moving carefully. "I don't know," she admitted. After my accident, I woke up in the hospital with no memory, but somehow still knowing sign language. The doctor said it's called procedural memory. Your body remembers what your mind forgets. I use it to help the children here. We talked for an hour. She told me about her simple life, her volunteer work, her feeling that she was searching for something she couldn't name. And with every word, every gesture, my carefully constructed revenge fantasy crumbled a little more. This woman wasn't a monster. She was kind, giving, and broken in a way that matched my own brokenness. But the question remained, was she my mother? And if so, what really happened 30 years ago? The next few weeks were strange. I extended my stay in Albany, telling Michael I needed time for research on my next book. It wasn't entirely a lie I was researching something, the most important mystery of my life. I began observing June Morrison from a careful distance, not stalking exactly, but watching, learning, trying to understand who this woman was. Every morning, she took the 647 bus from her modest apartment to the library where she worked. She brought her lunch in a worn brown bag, usually a sandwich and an apple. During her break, she'd sit on a bench outside and feed half her sandwich to the pigeons. After her shift ended at 3, she'd walk 4 blocks to the children's center and volunteer until evening. Then she'd take the bus home, stopping at the small grocery store to buy just enough food for one person. Her life was a circle of work, service, and solitude. I found myself drawn to the children's center more than I'd planned. The director, thrilled by my donation, gave me free access to observe the programs. So I sat in the corner of the activity room, my tablet in hand, ostensibly taking notes for my next book, but really just watching June. She had a special touch with the children, especially the ones who couldn't speak. There was a boy, maybe 7 years old, who'd been born without vocal cords just like me. He was angry, frustrated, throwing tantrums because he couldn't make people understand him. The other volunteers were at their wits' end, but June sat with him for hours, patient as a stone in a stream. She taught him sign language, yes, but more than that, she taught him that silence didn't mean powerlessness. I watched as, week by week, his tantrums decreased. He started smiling, started communicating, started believing in himself, and I understood something that shook me to my core. If this woman was my mother, she hadn't stopped being a mother when she lost me. She'd just found other children to pour that love into. One rainy afternoon, I worked up the courage to approach her directly. She was cleaning up after a session, putting away books and toys, humming a wordless tune that sounded achingly familiar. I tapped her shoulder. She turned, surprised. "Emma, I didn't know you were here today." I signed, "Can we talk? Just you and me?" Her expression shifted, something flickering across her face that might have been recognition, or might have been simple curiosity. Of course. "There's a small cafe down the street. Let me just finish cleaning up." 10 minutes later, we sat across from each other at a corner table in a quiet cafe, rain drumming against the windows. I ordered tea. She ordered coffee, black with 2 sugars. "I need to ask you something," I signed. "It might seem strange." "Go ahead," she signed back, her modified gestures mixing naturally with standard signs. "Your sign language, it's unique. Some of your signs are different from the standard ones." She nodded, looking down at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. "I know. People have mentioned it before. I think maybe whoever taught me, before I lost my memory, had their own special way of signing, like a personal dialect." "What do you remember about your accident?" I asked. "The one that took your memory?" Her face clouded. "Not much. I woke up in a hospital 30 years ago. The doctors said I'd been in a severe car crash. My car went off the road during a storm. I had no ID, no purse, nothing to identify me. No one came looking for me. How was that possible? I signed, leaning forward. In America, there are records, social security numbers, fingerprints. That's the strange part, she said. My fingerprints weren't in any system. It was like I didn't exist before that accident. Eventually, the hospital social worker helped me get new documentation, a new identity. June Morrison isn't my real name. It's just what they put on my new birth certificate. Morrison was the last name of the nurse who took care of me. June was her daughter's name. She said it felt right. I felt my pulse quicken. You had no past at all? Just fragments. Dreams, mostly. A playground in the rain. A child's face that I can never quite see clearly. And this overwhelming feeling of loss, like I failed someone terribly. But I don't know who or why. My hands were shaking now. I put them in my lap so she wouldn't see. What if I told you I think I know who you are? She stared at me, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. What do you mean? I reached into my bag and pulled out my tablet. I'd spent the previous night going through my old artwork pieces I'd drawn since I was a child. There was one particular image I'd painted hundreds of times: a rainy playground, a swing set, a bench, and the shadow of a woman walking away. I showed it to her. Do you recognize this? The color drained from her face. Her hand began to tremble, and she set down her cup with a clatter. How do you have this? I draw this exact scene. Over and over. It's the only clear image in my mind. But I don't know what it means. I draw it too, I signed. I've been drawing it since I was 5 years old. It's my earliest memory, or at least, I think it is. A rainy playground. Someone walking away from me. June's breathing became rapid. She pressed a hand to her chest. I don't understand. Why would we both? Because I think you're my mother. I signed, my hands firm despite the emotion flooding through me. And I think that playground is where we were separated. She stared at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, she shook her head. That's impossible. I would remember. I would know my own daughter. Would you? I challenged. If your memory was completely erased? But why? Why would I forget my own child? People don't just forget their children. I leaned back, considering my next words carefully. Unless the trauma was so severe that your mind chose to forget. As a way of protecting you. June's eyes filled with tears. If what you're saying is true, if I really am your mother, then what happened? Why were we separated? Did I abandon you? And there it was. The question I'd been asking myself for 30 years. The assumption I'd built my entire identity around. I don't know, I signed honestly, but I intend to find out. I pulled out another item from my bag, a folder that Michael had prepared for me, containing everything the private investigators had discovered over the years. It wasn't much, but there were a few crucial pieces: my original adoption records, which had been sealed, but which I'd finally gained access to through legal channels now that I was an adult. According to these records, I signed, I was placed for adoption through a private agency in California when I was 5 years old. The paperwork says I was found abandoned at a public park. But there's something strange. There's a notation here that says unusual circumstances and requires further investigation, but no follow-up documentation. June took the papers with shaking hands. As she read, tears began streaming down her face. 5 years old, she whispered. 30 years ago, the same time as my accident. Where did your accident happen? I asked. Upstate California, near Sacramento. the same region where I'd been found. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of this revelation settling over us like snow. Finally, June looked up at me, her eyes red but determined. "There's a place I go," she signed. "Every Saturday, rain or shine. A playground about 20 miles from here. I don't know why I go there, it just feels important. Like an appointment I can't miss. Would you? Would you come with me this Saturday?" I nodded, my throat tight with emotion I couldn't voice. "Maybe," she signed. "If we go there together, we'll remember what we've forgotten." Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, as if the universe was determined to recreate the weather of my recurring nightmare. I met June at the bus station at 9 in the morning. She was wearing a simple raincoat and carrying an old umbrella with a broken spoke. When she saw me, she smiled tentative, hopeful, afraid. Michael had offered to drive us, but I'd declined. This felt like something June and I needed to do alone, without assistance or mediators or anyone else's interpretations coloring what we might discover. The bus ride took 45 minutes, winding through small towns and wooded areas that grew increasingly familiar in a way that made my skin prickle. I'd never been to this part of New York before, or had I? June sat quietly beside me, staring out the window. Once she reached over and gently squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. Whatever we were about to discover, we would face it together. When we got off the bus, June led me down a residential street lined with modest houses and mature oak trees. Children's toys were scattered in yards. An elderly man was walking his dog. Everything looked normal, peaceful, unremarkable. Then we turned a corner, and my heart stopped. There it was. The playground from my nightmares, from my paintings, from the image that had haunted me for 30 years. It was smaller than I'd imagined, just a simple neighborhood playground with a swing set, a slide, a sandbox, and a few benches. The equipment was old and weathered, clearly dating back decades, and every single detail matched what I'd been drawing all these years. The angle of the swing set, the placement of the benches, the large oak tree that overhung one corner. I stopped walking. June turned back to look at me, and I saw recognition in her eyes. She knew. She'd seen my drawings. She understood what this moment meant. "I come here every Saturday," she signed, her hands trembling. "I sit on that bench over there, and I draw the same scene over and over. People must think I'm crazy, but I can't stop. It's like if I stop coming, I'll lose something even more important than what I've already lost." I moved forward slowly, my feet carrying me toward the bench she'd indicated. It was the same bench I'd drawn countless times. When I sat down, the perspective was exactly right, the view I'd been recreating from memory for 3 decades. June sat beside me. The rain fell softly around us, pattering on the leaves and darkening the wood chips under the swing set. "I remember," I signed suddenly, the words coming faster than I could think them through. Not everything, but fragments. I was playing on those swings. Someone was pushing me, someone who signed to me in a special way, not like anyone else. The rain started. We should have left, but I wanted to stay. I was laughing. June's hands rose to her face. Tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. Then, I closed my eyes, reaching for memories that had been locked away so long they'd turned to shadows. Then something changed. There were voices, angry voices. Someone grabbed me. Strong hands. A man's hands. I tried to call out, but I couldn't make sounds. I looked back and I saw you running after me, screaming, but they put me in a car and drove away. June made a sound, a broken, wordless cry that came from somewhere deep inside her. She grabbed my hands, holding them so tightly it almost hurt. I remember, she signed frantically. Oh God, I remember. We came to this playground. You loved the swings. You'd just learned a new sign, happy, and you kept signing it over and over because you were so proud of yourself. The rain started, but you wanted to stay. I said, okay, just 5 more minutes. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely form the signs. Then 2 men came. I didn't know them. They said they were from Child Services, that there had been a report of an unfit mother with a disabled child. I told them they were wrong, to leave us alone. But they grabbed you. They literally ripped you out of my arms. I was crying now, too, silent sobs shaking my shoulders. I chased the car, June continued, her signs becoming more agitated. I ran into the street screaming your name, Sarah, Sarah, Sarah. That was your name. The name I gave you. Sarah Mitchell. I'm your mother. I'm Grace Mitchell. Grace. That was her real name. Grace Mitchell. I went to the police, she signed, but they said there was no record of any child services agents in the area that day. They took a report, but I could tell they didn't believe me. They thought I was a troubled woman making up stories. A week later, I got a phone call, a man's voice. He said if I wanted to see you again, I needed to pay $50,000. I didn't have that kind of money. I sold everything I owned, borrowed from everyone I knew. But before I could make the exchange, they called again and said it was too late. You'd been placed. My mind was reeling. I hadn't been abandoned. I'd been kidnapped, taken from my mother, and sold through an illegal adoption ring. I couldn't accept it. Grace signed, tears streaming down her face. I kept searching. Every day, every night. I put up posters. I contacted every adoption agency I could find. I hired a private investigator with money I didn't have. And then one night, driving in the rain, exhausted, not sleeping for days, I crashed my car. When I woke up in the hospital, I couldn't remember any of it. Couldn't remember you. Couldn't remember myself. The only thing left was this feeling, this terrible, aching feeling that I'd lost something precious. And this playground. I couldn't remember why, but I knew I had to keep coming back here. We sat together in the rain, 30 years of separation collapsing into this one moment of terrible, beautiful truth. I didn't abandon you, Grace signed, her face crumbling. I never abandoned you. I searched until I literally lost my mind from grief. I pulled her into my arms, this woman who was a stranger and my mother all at once. We held each other and cried, our tears mixing with the rain, washing away 3 decades of lies and misunderstanding. The question I'd carried for 30 years finally had an answer. But that answer opened up a dozen new questions. Who had taken me? Who had sold me to the Hendersons? How had such a terrible crime gone unpunished? And most importantly, what did we do now? When we finally pulled apart, I took Grace's hands and signed something I'd never thought I'd sign, I forgive you. She shook her head fiercely. There's nothing to forgive. You were stolen from me. I forgive you for forgetting, I clarified. For not finding me. I spent 30 years hating you for something you didn't do. I need to forgive that version of you, even if she never existed. Does that make sense? Grace nodded, understanding in her eyes. And I need to forgive myself for failing to protect you. We sat in silence for a while longer, watching the rain fall on the empty playground. Somewhere, children were laughing. Somewhere, families were whole. And now, against all odds, we were becoming whole too. We should report this, I signed eventually. To the police. It might be 30 years late, but someone took me illegally. Someone sold me. They need to be held accountable. Grace nodded. Yes. But not today. Today, I just want to sit here with my daughter and remember what we lost. Tomorrow, we can start fighting for justice. So that's what we did. We sat on that bench until the rain stopped, and the sun broke through the clouds. Two women connected by trauma and love, and 30 years of searching finally found. The next morning, Michael helped me contact a lawyer who specialized in adoption fraud and human trafficking. Her name was Patricia Delgado, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd spent her career helping families torn apart by illegal adoptions. "Your case is unusual," Patricia said during our first meeting in her downtown office. Grace sat beside me, both of us still processing the previous day's revelations. Most illegal adoptions from that era have very little documentation. The agencies operated in legal gray zones, and many of them destroyed records when they closed down. But the fact that you have some paperwork, even incomplete paperwork, gives us a starting point. She spread out my adoption documents on the large conference table. This notation here, unusual circumstances, suggests that even the adopting parent's attorney had concerns about the legitimacy of the adoption. But they proceeded anyway. Could they have known? I signed and Michael translated. The Hendersons, could they have known I was stolen? Patricia's expression was carefully neutral. That's what we need to find out. Sometimes adoptive parents are completely innocent victims of fraudulent agencies. Other times, she trailed off, letting us draw our own conclusions. Over the next several weeks, Patricia's team worked to uncover the truth. They tracked down former employees of the now-defunct adoption agency. They searched through old court records and newspaper archives. They found other families who'd adopted children through the same agency around the same time. What they discovered was chilling. The agency, called New Beginnings Adoption Services, had operated in California for nearly 15 years before being shut down amid allegations of fraud. But the shutdown had been quiet, no criminal charges, no public scandal. The owners had simply closed up shop and disappeared. Patricia found 3 other cases similar to mine. Children who'd been taken from their biological parents, under false pretenses, and placed with wealthy families willing to pay premium fees for a quick, quiet adoption. In each case, the biological parents had been poor, marginalized, or like Grace left with no memory of what had happened to them. The pattern is clear, Patricia explained during one of our meetings. They targeted vulnerable families, single mothers, immigrant families, people who wouldn't have the resources or knowledge to fight back effectively. They'd stage a kidnapping, convince the biological parents that the child was gone forever, and then falsify documents to make the adoption look legitimate. "What about the Hendersons?" I signed. "Did they know?" Patricia pulled out a thick folder. "That's where it gets complicated. I found the original contract between the Hendersons and New Beginnings. They paid $200,000 for your adoption, far more than a typical adoption cost, even in wealthy circles. The contract included a clause that essentially said they were paying for expedited services and accepting the child. As is with limited background information, my stomach turned. So they knew something wasn't right. They knew enough to know they shouldn't ask questions, Patricia said carefully. Whether they knew you'd been kidnapped? That's harder to prove. But they certainly knew the adoption wasn't completely above board. Grace's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tightly. "What are our options?" Michael asked. "Legally speaking." "Several routes," Patricia said. "First, we can report this to the police and FBI. Human trafficking, even from 30 years ago, has no statute of limitations. Second, we can pursue a civil case against the Hendersons for their role in the illegal adoption. Third, We can work to identify others involved in the agency and hold them accountable. All of it, I signed. We do all of it. The investigation that followed was exhausting and emotionally devastating. FBI agents interviewed Grace and me separately, taking detailed statements. They exhumed old case files and reached out to law enforcement in other states where New Beginnings had operated. The Hendersons, when contacted by the FBI, hired expensive lawyers and claimed complete ignorance of any wrongdoing. We followed the law as we understood it, their attorney stated. My clients were assured by the agency that the adoption was legal. They had no reason to believe otherwise. It was technically true. The paperwork looked legitimate, but that expedited services fee and that suspiciously high payment told a different story. 3 months into the investigation, the FBI made a breakthrough. They found Harold Jensen, the former owner of New Beginnings, living under an assumed name in Arizona. He was 74 years old now, retired, living off the money he'd made from years of selling children to the highest bidder. His arrest made national news, and once the story broke, others came forward, more biological families looking for children who'd been taken, more adoptive families realizing they'd been sold children who'd been stolen from loving homes. The case became the largest adoption fraud investigation in decades. Through it all, Grace and I stayed close. She moved into my Manhattan apartment, at first just temporarily, while the investigation was ongoing, but gradually it became permanent. We were making up for 30 lost years, learning to be mother and daughter again. She taught me the signs she'd created just for us when I was small. I showed her my books, my artwork, the life I'd built from the ashes of what I'd thought was abandonment. We cried together often. We laughed too, discovering shared traits and habits that genetics and separation couldn't erase. One evening, as we sat together, watching the sunset over Central Park, Grace signed something that made my heart ache in the best way. I'm so proud of the woman you became. Even without me, you became extraordinary. I became extraordinary because of you. I signed back. You taught me in those first 5 years that being silent doesn't mean being powerless. I've spent my whole life trying to prove that. I just didn't remember I was proving it to you. 6 months after we'd sat together on that rainy playground bench, Harold Jensen pleaded guilty to multiple counts of child trafficking, fraud, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. His accomplices, including several corrupt social workers and a doctor who'd falsified medical records, received their own sentences. The Hendersons were never criminally charged, but they settled a civil suit with us for an undisclosed amount. I donated every penny to organizations that help reunite families torn apart by illegal adoptions. More importantly, they were publicly exposed for what they'd done, or at least what they'd been willing to ignore in exchange for the perfect adopted daughter. Their reputation in Connecticut high society was destroyed. Robert resigned from his positions on several charitable boards. Carol's friends stopped inviting her to their fundraisers. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall. Revenge, I'd learned, was a cold meal that never satisfied the hunger it promised to fill. What satisfied me was standing beside Grace at press conferences, telling our story, helping other families find hope that reunion was possible. A year after that rainy Saturday at the playground, Grace and I stood together at the opening ceremony of the Morrison Mitchell Foundation. We'd named it after both of our assumed identities, a reminder that sometimes you have to lose yourself completely before you can find your way back home. The Foundation's mission was threefold: help families affected by illegal adoptions, find each other, support legislation to close loopholes that allowed adoption fraud, and provide resources for deaf and disabled children in the foster care system. Grace ran the day-to-day operations, while I used my platform as a best-selling author to raise awareness and funds. My latest book, Silent Voices, a Memoir of Loss and Recovery, had just been published. It told our story, the kidnapping, the 30-year separation, the miraculous reunion. Critics called it devastating and hopeful in equal measure, and a testament to the unbreakable bond between mother and child. But more importantly, it resonated with thousands of families facing similar situations. Our foundation received hundreds of letters from people seeking help to find children or parents lost to illegal adoptions. We couldn't help everyone, but we tried. Every reunion we facilitated felt like healing a small part of our own wound. The opening ceremony was held at the Children's Center, where Grace had volunteered for years, the place where we'd first met, when I still thought of her as a stranger and myself as an orphan seeking revenge. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. You know, Grace signed to me as we watched children playing in the center's newly renovated playground. I spent 30 years feeling like I'd failed at the most important job a person can have, being a mother. I couldn't remember you, but that failure haunted me every single day. I squeezed her hand, waiting for her to continue. But then I found you again, and I realized something. I never stopped being your mother. Even when I couldn't remember your name or your face, my soul remembered. Why else would I have spent all those years helping deaf children? Why else would I have donated to missing children's organizations? Why else would I have gone to that playground every single Saturday, rain or shine? You were always searching for me, I signed, just like I was always searching for you. Exactly. And now that we've found each other, I don't feel like a failure anymore. I feel like the luckiest mother in the world. Because not everyone gets a second chance like this. She was right. We were lucky. Lucky that the documentary crew had filmed her. Lucky that I'd been watching that particular program that particular night. Lucky that we'd both kept drawing the same playground over and over until the universe finally pushed us back to that bench together. But it wasn't just luck. It was love, the kind of love that survives kidnapping and amnesia and 30 years of separation. The kind of love that lives in your bones and your hands and your heart, even when your mind forgets everything else. Later that evening, after the ceremony ended and the guests had gone home, Grace and I returned to that playground one more time. It had become our tradition every Saturday, rain or shine. We went there together. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just sat in comfortable silence. But we always went. This time, I brought my sketchbook. For 30 years, I'd drawn the same image, a rainy playground and a woman's retreating figure. But today, I drew something different. The playground was still there, and the rain was still falling. But instead of a woman walking away, I drew two women sitting together on a bench, sharing an umbrella. Their faces were turned toward each other, hands moving in conversation that needed no sound. Grace looked over my shoulder and smiled. That's beautiful. What will you call it? I wrote the title beneath the drawing, Finally Home, because that's what we'd found. Not a place, but each other. Home isn't always the house you grow up in, or the city where you were born. Sometimes home is a person, the one person in the world who knows your special way of signing love and will never, ever forget it again. The little boy Grace had been working with, the 7-year-old who couldn't speak, came running over to us. He'd made remarkable progress in the past year. His anger had transformed into confidence, his frustration into determination. He signed to Grace, "Will you read us a story?" Grace looked at me with a question in her eyes. I nodded. Together, we walked back into the center, where a small group of children had gathered for evening story time. Grace pulled out one of my books, The Girl Who Painted Words, and began to sign the story to the children. Her hands moved with practiced grace, creating the tale in 3 dimensions. But halfway through, she handed the book to me. "Your turn," she signed with a smile. I hesitated. I'd never done this before read to children in person. I'd done book signings and interviews, but always with Michael interpreting. This felt different, more intimate, more vulnerable. But then I looked at the children's faces, all of them deaf or nonverbal or both, and I saw myself in every single one. Children who'd been told, in ways both subtle and cruel, that their silence made them less than, that their inability to speak made them incomplete. I took the book and began to sign. And as I told the story of a girl who couldn't speak, but found power in art, in written words, in the unique way she saw the world, I realized I wasn't just telling their story or my story. I was telling our story, all of us who'd been told we were broken, but who'd learned that different doesn't mean damaged. When the story ended, the children applauded by waving their hands in the air, the deaf community's version of clapping. One little girl, no more than 6, came up to me and signed, "When I grow up, I want to be a writer like you." I knelt down to her level and signed back, "You can be anything you want to be. Your voice doesn't come from your throat, it comes from your heart. And your heart speaks just fine." She hugged me, and I felt Grace's hand on my shoulder. This, I thought, is what healing looks like. Not revenge, not wealth, not fame, but the simple act of helping others find the voice that society tried to silence. That night, back at our apartment, Grace and I sat together on the balcony, watching the lights of Manhattan twinkle like earthbound stars. She'd made chamomile tea, something she'd done every night for the past year, a small ritual that anchored our new life together. Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if we'd never been separated? Grace signed, her face thoughtful in the dim light. I considered the question. Sometimes. But then I think about all the people I wouldn't have met, all the books I wouldn't have written, all the children we wouldn't be helping now. Maybe everything happened exactly as it needed to. You don't resent the years we lost? I resent what was done to us, I clarified. I resent the people who stole me and sold me like a commodity. I resent the system that failed to protect us. But the years themselves? I'm trying to see them as preparation. They made me who I am. They made you who you are. And who we are together is pretty powerful. Grace smiled, but tears glistened in her eyes. You've always been wise beyond your years. Even when you were 5, you'd look at me with these knowing eyes, like you understood things you shouldn't have been able to understand. Tell me more, I signed. About when I was little. About before. And she did. She told me about the day I was born, how I'd come into the world silent, but with eyes wide open, taking everything in. She told me about my first birthday, how I'd been fascinated by cake, but refused to make a mess eating it. I'd insisted on using a spoon with surprising dexterity for a 1-year-old. She told me about teaching me to sign, how quickly I'd picked it up, how we'd invented our own signs for things that didn't have standard signs. Dragon was your favorite, she signed with a laugh. You'd make this elaborate gesture with both hands breathing fire. There was no official sign for dragon, so you made one up. These stories were treasures. Each one filled in a gap in my history, replacing the bitter narrative of abandonment with the truth of love. Do you know what I think about most? Grace signed, her expression turning serious. I think about the multiverse theory, the idea that there are infinite parallel universes where every possible version of events happens. And I think about all the versions of us in those other universes. Versions where I never crashed my car. Versions where the FBI found you right away. Versions where we were never separated at all. And, I prompted, and I think that in every single universe, no matter what happens, we find our way back to each other. Because that's what love does. It defies logic and probability and time itself. It finds a way. I reached across the small table between us and took her hands. You know what I spent 30 years believing? That I was unlovable. That my mother threw me away because I was defective. The Hendersons reinforced that belief every single day. And it became the foundation of everything I did. Every success was me trying to prove I had value despite being broken. Grace's face crumpled with pain, but I continued. But now I know the truth. I was always loved. Desperately, completely loved. And that changes everything. Not just my past, but my future. Because I'm not building on a foundation of rejection anymore. I'm building on a foundation of love that survived the impossible. What will you build? Grace asked. I don't know yet, I signed honestly. But whatever it is, we'll build it together. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping our tea and watching the city that never sleeps continue its endless dance of light and movement. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Patricia, our lawyer. Good news. Another family reunion facilitated through the foundation. Mother and son separated for 18 years. They're meeting tomorrow. Thought you'd want to know? I showed the message to Grace. Her face lit up with joy. That's 12 families we've helped reunite this year, she signed. 12 miracles. 13 if you count us, I reminded her. You'll always be the first miracle, she said. The one that made all the others possible. As we prepared for bed that night, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. The 30 years of pain and searching. The anger that had driven me to success. The revenge I'd planned but never executed. The truth that had set us both free. I'd come to Albany a year ago with a heart full of hate, ready to destroy the woman I thought had destroyed me. Instead, I'd found a mother whose love had transcended memory loss and time itself. I'd found a mission that gave my success meaning beyond personal achievement. And I'd found peace. The nightmares had stopped. For the first time in 30 years, I no longer dreamed of rainy playgrounds and retreating figures. Instead, I dreamed of the future of all the families we'd help. All the children who'd learn that being silent didn't make them powerless. All the mothers and daughters and sons who'd find their way back to each other. Before turning off my light, I checked on Grace one more time. Her room was across the hall from mine. She was already asleep, her face peaceful. One hand resting on a framed photo on her nightstand, a picture of us taken at the foundation's opening ceremony. Both of us smiling, hands intertwined. I thought about what she'd said about the multiverse, about finding each other in every possible reality. And I realized that in this reality, right here, right now, we had everything we needed. Not revenge, not answers to every question, not even justice fully served. But we had each other. And we had the chance to make sure no other mother and child would lose 30 years to the cruelty of people who saw children as commodities instead of human beings. As I drifted off to sleep, I signed into the darkness a habit I'd developed, speaking to the universe in the language my mother had taught me. Thank you. For the documentary I almost didn't watch. For the unique sign language that connected us across 30 years of separation. For the playground where we finally remembered. For the love that never forgot, even when memory failed. For second chances. For coming home. For silent voices that learned to speak in ways more powerful than words. And somewhere in the universe, I like to imagine, every other version of us was signing the same thing, in the same special way, finally together again. Epilogue. 5 years later, the Morrison Mitchell Foundation had facilitated over 200 family reunions. We'd helped change legislation in 12 states, making illegal adoption harder to execute and easier to prosecute. We'd provided scholarships to 300 deaf and disabled children. But the moment I'm most proud of happened on a Tuesday afternoon in spring. Grace and I were at the Children's Center. We still volunteered there every week when a woman walked in with a boy about 10 years old. The boy was deaf and had clearly been through trauma. He wouldn't make eye contact. He flinched when adults moved too quickly near him. The woman introduced herself as his foster mother. He was rescued from a trafficking situation 3 months ago, she explained through an interpreter. He hasn't communicated much since. But someone told me about your foundation, about your work with deaf children. I thought maybe. Grace knelt down in front of the boy. She didn't try to touch him or force him to look at her. She just began to sign, slowly and gently, "You're safe now. You're home." The boy's eyes flickered to her hands. Something shifted in his expression. Grace continued, "I know you're scared. I know you feel lost. But you are not alone. And you are not broken. You are exactly who you're meant to be." The boy watched her hands for a long moment. Then, hesitantly, his own hands moved. "How do you know?" "Because I was lost too," Grace signed. "For a very long time. But I found my way home. And you will too." The boy looked from Grace to me and back again. Then, in a voice that seemed surprised by its own existence, he signed, "Promise?" Grace glanced at me. I nodded. Together, we signed back, "Promise." And in that moment, watching Grace work the same magic on this frightened child that she'd once worked on me, I understood the full circle of our story. We'd been torn apart by cruelty, reunited by chance, and now we were using our second chance to make sure others got theirs too. That, I realized, was the real meaning of revenge. Not destroying the people who hurt you, but building something so beautiful, so meaningful, so full of love that it erases the darkness they tried to create. The boy stayed at the center that afternoon. By the time he left, he was smiling. Not a big smile, just a small curve at the corner of his mouth. But it was a beginning. Just like Grace and I, 30 years ago, drawing the same playground in 2 different cities, had been a beginning. Just like that rainy Saturday when we sat together on a bench and remembered, had been a beginning. Every ending is just a beginning wearing a different face. And our story? It wasn't a story about loss. It was a story about love that refused to die. About voices that spoke louder than words. About a mother who never stopped searching, even when she couldn't remember what she was searching for. It was a story about finally coming home,